I know you guys got a lot of problems out here, but your governor's very concerned about what we're doing in Florida, so I figured I had to come by. Well, thank you so much. It's really an honor to be at the Ronald Reagan Library. And as I was coming here, I started to think a little bit about President Reagan and about some of the issues that we're facing now. And of course, you know, President Reagan had a great sense of humor. And I thought about a story that there was a debate between three of our founding fathers, Dr. Benjamin Rush, Thomas Jefferson, and Ben Franklin. And the debate was about what was the world's oldest profession. And Dr. Rush said, as a physician, he said, the world's oldest profession is the doctor, because Eve was cut out of Adam's rib, so it has to be the physician. Thomas Jefferson, who you know designed Monticello, said no, the world's oldest profession is the architect. After all, it was the architect who brought order out of all the chaos in the universe. And Ben Franklin said, no, you're both wrong. The world's oldest profession is the politician. Who do you think created the chaos in the first place? And President Reagan understood this. His famous quote that I'm the most terrifying words in the English language, or I'm here from the government and I'm here to help. He understood the vital role that government had to play. He didn't say no government, and he understood that there was core functions of government, but he also understood how government could be a negative force if not applied properly. And I think if you look over the last 4 or 5 years and you look at the performances of individual states and you compare Florida versus California, New York, Illinois, some of those other states, we have had a great experiment, a great test in governing philosophies. Because of course, you know, we approach things much differently in Florida than you guys have out here. Much differently in Florida than they've done in New York and in Illinois and many of these other states. And what has the result of that been? You know, you have elections in your state, and that's fine, but the American people as a whole, in some ways, have voted about this experiment because they voted with their feet. And if you look over the last 4 years, we've witnessed a great American exodus from states governed by leftist politicians imposing leftist ideology and delivering poor results. And you've seen massive gains in states like Florida who are governing according to the tried and true principles that President Reagan held dear. Florida has led the nation in net in-migration, I think 3 or 4 years in a row. California has either been number 1 or number 2 in net out-migration. New York is right up there with you on that. And it's one thing with New York because there is a little bit of a rhythm of life where you can work and maybe you retire to Florida, get a condo in Boca Raton, fine. Maybe you get out of the Minnesota winters and live in Naples. We've got a lot of that, and that's always happened. But the extent to which people are moving and the reason for which they're moving has been unique over these last 4 years. I just think about California. And when I was in the Navy, I was in Coronado for a time before we went to Iraq. It was beautiful. And I just thought to myself, you know, man, I understand why people try to get to California. And from the beginning of this state's history, all the way until like the last 4 or 5 years, people beat a path to California. You didn't beat a path away from California. And yet now you see the state hemorrhaging population. I can tell you, growing up in Florida, I never remember seeing a California license plate. Why would you? Why would you leave, right? And then all of a sudden, over these last few years, we start to see Californians show up, these license plates. And I can tell you, that spooked a lot of people in my state because they didn't know how those Californians were going to vote when they got to the state of Florida. But we saw that, and we've seen people move from the West Coast, not just California, but Oregon and Washington State in numbers like we've never seen. This is a result of better governance in states like Florida. It is a result of poor governance in these left-wing states. That's why people are moving. Just think about fiscal management. The state of Florida, we have millions of more people now than the state of New York does. And yet New York State, they have twice the size of the state budget than the state of Florida does. And yet we have better infrastructure, better services, and higher performing K through 12 schools. So where is all this money going? But not only does New York State have twice the budget that Florida does, New York City's budget with 8 million people is basically the same size as Florida's state budget with a state of over 22 million people. Our per capita debt in Florida is the second lowest in the United States. New York's per capita debt is the fifth highest in the United States. We have no income tax. We're not taxing people like they are. They tax the dickens out of you, and they're still deep in debt. Yes, in terms of taxes, of course, no income tax. Florida's the second lowest per capita tax burden in the United States. New York and California rank among the top 10 most taxed states. And I don't have to remind you, not only do you have stiff income tax, you've got the highest sales tax in all of the United States. In terms of business tax climate, Florida has the fourth best business tax climate. New York is second worst, followed by California with the third worst business tax climate. Is it any wonder that the state of Florida ranks #1 in new business formations? Even though we're roughly half the size of California, we have more new business formations. And unemployment in the state of Florida, the December numbers, we were 2.7%. New York and California were 4.1%. We have significantly more people employed than we did prior to COVID, and states like New York still haven't recovered. And for the first time in recorded history, the state of Florida has more total people employed than the state of New York. And that's saying something, because we got a lot of retired people in the state of Florida. So those results speak for themselves. But you know, we've always had lower taxes in Florida. That's nothing new. We've never had an income tax, and we've always worked to keep government small. So that in and of itself, while it contributes, that is not the only reason why people have moved. I think the pandemic caused people to reevaluate who was in charge of their state governments more than any other event in my lifetime.